Welcome to the Botanical Medicine class. As you know, my name is Dr. Bogdan Makartchuk. I'm a recent graduate of NUNM from the naturopathic program. I became fascinated by herbs, largely early on through my experiences using different teas. So my parents were both doctors in Ukraine. So when I was growing up, they, if I had a fever, they would give me chamomile, and I never really liked the taste of it until now. They would give me all sorts of different teas and herbs and plants. So I was kind of brought up on this idea that herbs can be healing before I got into the more mainstream school system, where a lot of herbalism is kind of scoffed at. I even remember in a lot of my university courses, like chemistry or biology, herbs would only be brought up to say that they were poisonous. I don't know if y'all had that experience, but they would talk about castor oil, how poisonous it is. And there was not really any talk of millennia of using herbs as medicine. Even as late as the 1920s, there's a group called the Eclectic Physicians, and they were basically MDs, but they used herbs and they developed this deep science of it. Unfortunately, with a lot of the political movements that were going on in the United States at the time, and the big takeover of big medicine and pharma and all of that, a lot of that was pushed to the side, and now it's considered alternative. It's considered, woo-woo. But the goal of this class is to show you that it's not woo-woo unless you want it to be. We will be going into some of the woo-woo aspects as well, because I do appreciate the plant spirit and the plant medicine aspect of it. I think that that's important too, along with everything. Okay. So now we dive into the essence of herbalism. So what are we going to cover here in terms of the theory? The energetics, the organ systems, and the specifics. This is one of the most important aspects of actually choosing the right herb for what you want to use it for. Like if a family member has a cough, or you have some condition you want to treat, understanding these three things, the energetics, the organ system, and the specifics of the herb, will get you way farther than just reading out of an herb book will. And actually, what you'll find that's very interesting as this class goes on is that you'll begin to be able to predict what an herb does. So as I explain the different energetics, things like cold, hot, dry, and damp of the herbs, this is an ancient system used in Greek medicine for thousands of years, and kind of still exists, but it's hidden. I'll get into that as well. But what you'll be able to do is, if you read an herb book, oh, this herb is a cold herb, you'll suddenly know like 5 uses for it before you read anything else. So that's kind of my goal with the energetics. And the energetics, in a sense, they are patterns. They're patterns of looking at how the body functions, of how symptoms work, of how illness manifests, and how those herbs counteract that. The organ systems, that's pretty self-explanatory rather. That's what the herbs are good for in terms of organs. Great example of this is milk thistle. It's very liver specific, very good for protecting the liver. There's many other herbs that have specific organs that they function on. That aspect is also incredibly fascinating to me. And I wonder a lot, how is it that one herb works for this organ and another works for this other organ? And I really don't know. I think that's a mystery of healing. And the specifics, that's the overall pictures that the herbs work for, meaning the complete symptom pictures. We're going to go into some modern vocabulary, all those fancy science terms that herbalists throw around. We're going to go through the most common ones. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the pharmacology of herbs, mainly the primary compounds that are in herbs, and we'll connect them to the energetics. So you'll be able to understand pharmacology beyond pharmacology. All right, so these are the herbs we're going into. By popular demand, several of these herbs you may recognize, for they are the herbs that you requested to learn about. So we're going to be going through mugwort, calendula, bilberry, ginger, dill, camellia, that's the dream herb, sage, rosemary, red clover, St. John's wort, and chamomile. All right, so herbal energetics. Essentially, the Greek elements relates to herbal energetics. So fire is hot and dry, water is cold and damp, air is hot and damp, and earth is cold and dry. So the way that you understand the energetics of an herb, so there could be a hot herb, there could be a cold herb, there could be a dry herb, and there could be a damp herb. Overall, it's a kind of pattern of how the herb functions, meaning what it makes the body do in terms of patterns. We're also going to get into how you choose which herbal energetic herb to use. Um, and the main way we do that is the law of contraries. If you have read a little bit about herbalism, you may be familiar with this term. Basically, it means that for a cold condition, you treat it with a hot herb. A hot condition, you treat it with a cold herb. So it's opposites. A dry condition, you treat with damp herbs, and a damp condition with dry herbs. So if somebody has the manifestations of a dry condition, we'll get into what that means. You use herbs that tend to be damp. What this helps with is really narrowing down which herb to choose, because you may have looked up on the internet herbs for headaches, right? And you come back with like 30 herbs that you could use and you have no idea which one to use. Should you just use all of them? The system of energetics helps you kind of parse out which herb is best. So there could be a headache, but the person has an overall cold condition, meaning, you know, they have slowed down function. They're kind of pale looking. A cold is actually a good example of a cold condition. A cold is cold and damp. The dampness refers to excess secretions and fluid and things of this nature. So these are the hot herbs. I'm not going to go through all of these because you can use these for your own reference, but this will come in useful later in terms of treating cold conditions. So hot herbs in general are the herbs that are pungent, they're spicy. A lot of the spice herbs are hot herbs, things that you add into a dish to give it a kick, herbs that you eat that make you sweat. All these are examples of hot herbs. Everyone's had the experience of you eat a way too hot pepper and you feel like you're going to melt and nothing can help you. And it's very irritating. That's like the highest level of hot herb. And there's different classes within the hot herbs. So there's spicy herbs. There's more aromatic herbs. There's the bitter herbs. And there's the other that don't really fit into any. So today I'm going to be making a tincture out of fresh calendula and fresh red clover. We'll talk a little bit about how those work. These are the cold herbs. So this picture is of the mint family herbs. I don't know if you guys can recognize any of the herbs, but I see several in there to the eye. I see lemon balm in there. I see rosemary. The mint family in general is very cooling. So what this means is that it's useful for a hot condition, which we'll get into what that is. The way that you know that it's a cold herb is that they tend to be pretty sour by taste, which brings a lot of the citrus fruits into the cold herb category. So things like lemon, orange, they're very cooling. A lot of fruits in general and things that contain a lot of vitamin C are cooling. What that means in a basic sense is that they're anti-inflammatory. So the term anti-inflammatory literally means that it's anti-fire. So cold herbs are anti-fire or hot conditions. You can think of inflammation as a hot condition in general. You'll see kind of how intuitively it comes together because these are terms that we use all the time. So in general, cold herbs tend to bring down the nervous system. When something gets cold, it kind of slows down. Like when your arms get really cold, it's hard to move them. They're very slow. Cold herbs do that same thing to the body. They calm down the body. They sedate. They cool inflammation. So in this class, there's several different kinds of herbs. There's the delicious and fragrant herbs of the rosacea family: rose hips, rose petals, peach, wild cherry. These are all very cooling. Then there's the sedative class. Lemon balm is in this category. Lemon balm is interesting in its effects, and it kind of shows an aspect of the organ specificity of herbs. So lemon balm is a nervine, so it acts specifically on the nervous system. But even more specifically, it is cooling to the stomach. So lemon balm is really useful for nervous stomach, hyperactive stomach, um, stomach ache associated with anxiety. So it is at the same time a nervous system herb as it is a digestive herb. And it's cooling because it slows down the processes, it sedates the body, and it kind of calms down inflammation in general. So in that category, we have elderberry, passion flower is another good one. And then the very bitter mints like skullcap and motherwort. So at the highest level of cold herbs is something like opium. It's so cooling that it can actually slow your heart rate and your respiration to a point where you go into coma or you die. That's like the highest level of a cold herb. So what I'm trying to get across here is that cold does mean cold as we think of it. You know, poor circulation, cold hands, feeling cold all the time. But it also refers to slowing down processes. Cold is just the word that they used in ancient medicine, but they didn't just mean temperature. Same thing with hot. Hot isn't just related to temperature. It is that, but it's also stimulating. Hot herbs are very stimulating in general. Where this becomes very interesting is when you get into the organ specifics of the herbs, because you'll have an herb that's specific to the liver, but it's cooling. So it's cooling to the liver. What this means is that this herb specifically is anti-inflammatory for the liver, or it calms down the liver. Then we have the dry herbs. These ones tend to be pretty bitter, and if you've drank very strong green tea, then you felt what the astringency is. It's that feeling of kind of puckering on the tongue that feels like it's almost tightening and it feels a little bit dry. Those are the quintessential dry herbs. They tend to contain a lot of tannins. That's one of the main compounds that gives it that drying effect. And what they do is they constrict tissues. That will come in later when we talk about damp conditions. So the dry herbs kind of constrict these things that are excessively releasing mucus or something. For example, if you had a really bad runny nose and it's just running and running and it won't stop, you would want an herb that is drying, but you would also want an herb that's very specific to the respiratory system and the sinuses. If you found those two things in the herb, you probably found the right herb to use. And that's what's kind of beautiful about this system is that it's quite simple, but its uses are very far ranging, where you don't need to know that this herb is good for runny nose, but you know that it's cool and you know specific to sinuses, so it must be good for that. So we're talking about energetic processes in the body now. So this is going beyond, as I was saying, the cookie cutter, this herb for that. We're trying to get beyond that. So some examples of very astringent herbs are raspberry leaf, geranium, witch hazel, as you may know, is probably one of the most astringent. There's the witch hazel USP. I don't know if you put that on your skin, but it makes it pretty dry. Black walnut, horse chestnut, those are good ones. So there's actually two kinds of damp conditions, which I'll get into in a moment. So the astringent ones are good for the damp relaxation type. The damp relaxation is the kind of dampness that's just flowing out. It's referred to as relaxation because it's like the tissues are relaxed. They're just releasing everything. So anything that has a lot of fluids coming out is damp relaxation, whether that's diarrhea or that's sweating or it's a lot of tears or watery eyes, excess salivation, anything where a lot of fluids are coming out, that's damp relaxation. So the astringent herbs are what you use for those kind of conditions. On the other hand, you also have damp stagnation. That's where there's a fluid buildup in the body, but it's stuck in the body. It's not able to leave. So for those kind of herbs, you would actually want to use blood purifying and laxative herbs. Things like burdock root, dandelion root, golden seal, alfalfa, Oregon grape, etc. So for conditions where the fluid can't leave, the damp stagnation specific herbs are best. So I'll give you an example. If somebody has a lot of edema or swelling in their legs, that's like a fluid buildup that won't leave their body. But you wouldn't exactly want to give them an astringent herb, because the astringent herb, what does it do? It contracts the tissues, but you don't want the tissues to contract because the fluids are already stuck in the body. They need to get out. So for those conditions, you use more of the laxative and blood purifying herbs. A good example are the diuretic herbs. You may be familiar with the term, maybe not. It basically means it promotes urination. Caffeine is a great example of a diuretic herb, rather tea or coffee. And if you've ever drank it, you may have noticed that you go to the bathroom maybe 3 or 4 times more than usual. Well, those kind of herbs are very useful for when there's a lot of fluid buildup, obviously, because you're expelling a lot of fluid. And there's some examples on the left there. Then we have the damp herbs. These tend to be pretty sweet in flavor, salty, they might be oily, and a lot of the mucilaginous herbs fall in this category. These are the herbs that form a mucilage. So marshmallow is one of the prime examples of this. If you've ever made a marshmallow tea, or rather you tried to make a tea, you'll notice that it turns into this goopy, kind of snotty consistency. It doesn't make a tea in the normal sense. Those are your damp herbs. When you take in damp herbs, it's almost like you're coating your body with that kind of moisture that it loses. So for example, one of the reasons why marshmallow is often used for sore throats, even though it's not an herb that's used for the immune system in general, but when the throat is irritated and very dry, having that marshmallow coat helps the pain go away, and it helps kind of protect that area from bacteria. So it has that property through that mechanism. So we have the mucilages. Comfrey is a great one. Marshmallow, as I said, psyllium husk, plantain, slippery elm. Those are all examples. An example of a very dry condition is constipation. There's like a lack of ability to expel what's there. So that's more of a damp stagnation, not damp stagnation. That's just a dry pattern. So the damp herbs are useful for that. And you may know psyllium husk. It definitely promotes regular bowel movements. It's very good at that. And that's one of the reasons that that's the case, besides that it just has a lot of dietary fiber. Then you have the oily herbs like evening primrose oil, flaxseed, sesame seed oil, hemp seed. It's one of the reasons why these herbs are really good for dry skin, because dry skin is a quintessential dry condition of the skin. So you put damp herbs on it and it fixes it. Then we have some of the sweet ones, milky oats, ginseng, licorice, red clover, astragalus. This sweet class is very nutritive, they call it in the herbalist world. That means that it really tonifies and builds up the system. You know, anything that's sweet, carbohydrates, sugar, it tends to kind of build up the system, maybe too much. So the sweet herbs are kind of like that as well. They build up the system. Okay. So now that we kind of went through the different types of herbs, we'll go through how you recognize which condition is which. So as I go through this, you might be thinking of people you know, or yourself, or things that you've experienced, and you can kind of find which kind of herb you'd want to use for yourself. So the hot state is a very excited, overstimulated, inflammatory state. We notice it when, you know, our skin or anywhere else is very red, swollen, tender. It's literally warm to the touch. A hot condition archetypally is kind of a fever. It's this hot, irritated, stimulated kind of condition. The hot condition is when there's an overfunction of the organ. So you'll see that when we give cold herbs, as I was saying, they sedate the system. They calm down that overactivity. So if an area is very irritated, an example is like ulcers. That's heat in the stomach. So you give cooling herbs that are specific for the stomach to lower the inflammation, to coat the area, to lower that inflammatory process. One of the key signals of a hot condition, very useful to remember, is pain. When there's pain, in general, it means that it's a hot condition. So if there's a lot of irritation to the muscle, like let's say you've been lifting weights or you did some new exercise and that area is kind of really irritated, painful, it's because there's literally inflammation in the muscle. That's what makes it painful. When we look at the tongue, this is kind of advanced herbalist techniques, but if you like looking at your tongue in the mirror, this might be helpful for you. The tongue looks very red and, it looks like it's like a fiery tongue. So you might notice that as you go forward. And the symptoms you might feel when you have a hot condition is anxiety, feeling restless, sharp pains, and just very sensitive in general. High blood pressure is an example of a hot condition. So for the hot pattern, you want to use cold herbs. Treating using the law of contraries, you give a cold herb for a hot condition. As I said, cooling herbs are sedative, and the nervine plant class, things like lemon balm, passion flower, pretty much most of the mint family tends to be these nervines, specific for the nervous system and also cooling. Those are very good for hot conditions. So anxiety, in a sense, it can be either a hot or cold condition, but it tends to be more of a hot condition. And this is where that idea of hot as temperature kind of falls apart, because now it's referring to overstimulation. So when one is anxious, they're overstimulated. The nervous system is overstimulated. So these cooling herbs that are specific for the nervous system, they calm that down. And pretty much anyone ever says an herb is anti-inflammatory, it means it's a cooling herb. Typically, the compounds also that are very anti-inflammatory are the flavonoids in herbs, things like vitamin C. All right, so for the cold pattern, it's essentially a state of depression, mentally, but also from the function of the body. So something is not working like it should. Something is sluggish, something is slow. So an example of a cold condition of the nervous system could be something like memory loss. Things are just not working the way they need to. Everything's kind of slowed down, reduced in function. We'll go into this herb in a little bit. Rosemary is a nervine, so specific for the nerves, but it also is slightly warming. And that's part of the reason why it's helpful for memory. So rosemary is known as the remembrance herb. It's been used for thousands of years for memory specifically. That's an example of how this system pans out when you look through the herb effects. So what you'll see with a cold condition is, pale, kind of lax type of tissues. There might be some numbness, cool to the touch. That's basically diminished blood flow to the area. A lot of cold conditions are caused by lack of blood flow to an area. The tongue in this case is kind of darkish. It's not red and pink and lively like in the other conditions. So if you ever looked in the mirror and you had a really bad cold and your tongue was just kind of, pale and just not looking good, that's a cold condition. There's usually a coldness in extremities, a sense of feeling cold, and poor circulation. Anemia is a good case of cold condition. It's a state where there's not enough red blood cells, essentially, in some cases, or they're not carrying enough oxygen. In either case, there's a lack of activity of the blood that needs to happen. So somebody who's anemic, their eyes are kind of pale looking, their hands are pale, they just look kind of sickly, ghostly. That's a classic cold condition. Also, in general, chronic conditions are cold conditions. Things that go on for very long periods of time, things like heart disease, diabetes, they tend to be the cold conditions, which you use hot herbs for. So in general, the hot herbs are circulatory stimulants. So they stimulate the movement of blood throughout the body. They're warming diaphoretic. Diaphoretic are herbs that produce sweating. So any herb that you eat that makes you sweat A lot of the cayenne type peppers are great examples of those. Also bitters. I don't know if y'all are familiar with bitter tonics like gentian, which are incredibly bitter. The way that they function is they stimulate digestion. And so they're hot herbs in that sense, because when there's a cold stomach, there's less digestive activity, there's indigestion. You get things like bloating and gas and just, stomach pains and just feeling like you're not really digesting your food. That's where these hot, bitter herbs come in. This is another reason why spices have been so used in cooking, especially the spicy spices, is because they stimulate digestion, because they are hot, they increase activity. So in general, the conditions that most people have, or the symptoms that most people have, tend to be a lack of heat or vitality rather than too much of it. It's more rare for somebody to have, a very hot condition. Cold conditions are much more likely. So a lot of the hot herbs are very good for boosting vitality, energy. And we'll go into some of those hot herbs. You know several of them: ginger, cayenne, anything that makes you kind of feel warm in your body. That's a hot herb. And you use those for cold conditions. If you want to do an experiment, just to prove to yourself that herbs really work, when you have like really cold hands and feet, take some fresh ginger and chew it. And notice how you feel in like 10 minutes. Every time I've done this, it's kind of spooky actually. You'll feel like the warmth slowly returning to your hands, and it feels like almost like the blood's moving back through. And this happens within, 5 or 10 minutes. This is an example of these ideas of hot and cold are kind of abstract, but we can perceive them if we know what they look like in the body. In general, the inflammatory process is largely a process that removes toxin from the body and it stimulates. But the inflammatory process can get too far. And that's when you have a hot condition and you'd use a cold herb. There's an interesting correlation here between how pharmaceuticals work versus how herbs work. Typically, pharmaceuticals, especially antibiotics, they're very, very cold. This idea of cold and hot, it doesn't apply to just herbs. It applies to foods. It applies to pharmaceuticals. Antibiotics are, so cold that they kill all the bacteria. They, lower some of the inflammatory response. Things like ibuprofen that lower fever, they're very, very cold. They're so cold that when you take them, your fever goes away. Now, there's this idea that every process in the body has a purpose. So a fever doesn't happen for no reason, right? A fever is your body's attempt to heal itself. It's trying to drive off bacteria. It's trying to regenerate itself. And the inflammatory process is really important for that. But when you use these ibuprofen and things like that, instead of letting the fever go, the idea is that you actually push down this inflammation. This is where this idea of pharmaceuticals, because of their potency, being suppressive. They suppress symptoms. Why? Because they just stop them. They don't deal with necessarily what caused them. So when you take, a steroid cream, you put a steroid cream on your body, or you take oral steroids, they're so cooling, they pretty much just stop inflammation throughout the whole body. That works, right? I mean, the itchy skin goes away, this or that. It works very well for that. But the inflammatory process has a purpose in the body. So really, it's like, the way I like to think of it is you're sweeping dirt under the rug and you just keep sweeping it. Sweeping dirt under the rug makes your house seem cleaner, but you do that for a couple of years and you're going to be living in a house full of dust. And that's kind of what happens to people with these chronic conditions. The early naturopaths had this belief, and I agree with them, that suppressing symptoms, it's a very short-term solution, but in the long term, it can lead to these chronic conditions. there's an interesting phenomena that happens with people who have asthma from a young age. Um, and they're given, a lot of steroids, and they're given inhaler and all of that. That later in life, they'll develop eczema, they'll have itchy skin, and their allergies will even get worse. So originally it helps, but you give it for a long enough period of time and it actually suppresses the body's natural response. And now you have all sorts of weird other conditions. So the dry pattern of illness, this is essentially a state of atrophy, meaning that it's kind of like a withering process. Like somebody who is older and they have some kind of disease, kind of wasting disease, you notice they lose a lot of weight, they get really skinny, it's hard for them to keep on weight. That's a dry condition. So their skin will be dry, but dry also refers to this kind of state of like hardness, this state of withering away. And this is part of the reason why those damp herbs are used for dry conditions, because they build up the body, they're nutritive, they put moisture back in. So for that, you'll see a very cracked tongue, very withered. There's also a condition called false heat. This is a really cool thing I learned from Matthew Wood. He's a pretty well-known herbalist. Is that you can actually have something called false heat. Now, we were talking about hot conditions, right? But false heat is when it seems like it's a hot condition, but it's actually not. The condition is so dry that the lack of fluid isn't properly cooling the body. So it's hot because of that. It's not hot because it's an inflammatory response. So like if you are very dehydrated, you might notice you might feel kind of, hot, kind of, like almost hot flashy if you really are pretty dehydrated. So if you give a cooling herb for that, it's not really going to help you. That's the false heat pattern. For those, you give damp herbs. And in general, somebody with a very kind of dry constitution, they're very exhausted, run down, their skin is rough. They just look like, like a withered tree, kind of. And you use damp herbs for a dry pattern. So those are the ones that are the mucilages, the tonifiers, etc. And finally, there is the damp pattern of illness. There's actually two kinds of dampness. There's the kind of dampness called damp stagnation, as I was mentioning, and damp relaxation. So damp relaxation is there's a lot of fluid, but it's relaxed, so it's leaving the body. So, runny nose, the pulse feels very strong. There's diarrhea, aka relaxation of the bowels. There might be a lot of sweating, salivation, urination. Think of anything where a lot of fluids are coming out. Like you have, a cold and you could hardly even breathe. There's so much coming out. Those are the kind of herbs that you'd use, like a dry and stringent herb that kind of pulls together the tissues and stops that. Then there's the damp stagnation pattern. There's swollen edema. Typically, what you see with the kind of discharges that do happen with the damp stagnation is they tend to be colored, like they tend to be yellow, greenish, and thick, kind of like these bacterial type of infections. A lot of them are damp stagnation. And this is the classic coated tongue that they talk about in Chinese medicine, where the tongue is just completely kind of white. These are these damp stagnation conditions. And for these, you actually want all that mucus to get out. You don't want to stop the mucus or dry it out. You want it to leave the body. Now, a lot of those over-the-counter decongestions, they work for mucus because they stop it from happening. But the mucus has a purpose in the body, right? It expels bacteria. There's a lot of antibacterial enzymes in mucus and helps coat and protect your body so that it can't be attached to as easily by, viruses and bacteria. But when you take like something that's a decongestant, you might be just stopping the mucus from leaving. And that's exactly what you need to do. Actually taking herbs that increase mucus, although very unpleasant, is the right approach in terms of actually healing yourself. And as I was saying, the damp stagnation pattern, you want to use dry herbs, especially ones that are kind of laxatives, blood purifying. They essentially work, especially the bitters, they increase the secretions in the body and kind of move everything out of the bowels. Um, all right, now organ systems. All right, so we went through energetics, the system of hot and cold, dry and damp. Just as a recap, you always want to use opposites. Although you may be familiar with homeopathy. What homeopathy is interesting in is that it takes another approach to how to treat, different conditions. So in traditional Western herbalism, you have a hot condition, you give a cold herb. But in homeopathy, it's just the opposite. If you have a hot condition, you give a hot herb, but you give a very small amount of it. So the idea is that when you give a small amount of an herb, like drop dosing, like taking a few drops of tincture or making a very weak tea, you're putting an influence in the body that the body is going to try to come over. It's going to try to kind of resist it. So when you have a really hot condition like a fever, if you give a little bit of an herb that actually stimulates fever, that increases fever, it might be just enough to bring it up enough so that it actually drives it out, so that the body recognizes that it's more assisting the body rather than going against what it's doing in interest of helping it. So in terms of organ systems, once you know the energetic of the herb, then you need to know what the organ system is. As I was saying, milk thistle is an example of a cooling liver herb, meaning that it's specific for the liver and it's also cooling, so it's sedative, and it kind of slows down function. Another key thing to understand from this system is that you can have more than one thing happening at once. Usually you don't just have a hot condition, and usually you don't really just have a hot herb. Usually you have like a damp and cold condition. They're both damp, a lot of fluids, and cold, reduced function, weakness, cold hands and feet. And the same thing with herbs. A lot of the very hot herbs are also drying. So ginger is also very drying on top of being hot. So you can have, two things going on at once. So a lot of the herb class tells you about what organ system it belongs to. So the nervine class, things like lemon balm, lavender, rosemary, they're specific to the nervous system. Also, a lot of the other mint family herbs, as I was saying, basil, thyme, and oregano, a lot of these spice herbs are also specific to the nervous system. Then we have an example like the adaptogen class. You may have heard of these things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng. They're specifically help adaptation of the body. The organ that they're specific for is the HPA axis. The HPA axis is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's essentially how the brain communicates with the adrenals in the stress response. So, you see a stressor and there's some like nervous system process that happens, and then that causes the adrenals to release stress hormone, cortisol. This process through long periods of excess stress can become dysfunctional, and the stress response becomes inappropriate. Panic attacks are a great example of this. It's when the body has been so stressed for so long that the stress response is just doing its own thing. It almost doesn't even correspond to what's happening. The littlest trigger will set someone off. The adaptogen class is really good for these kind of things, adapting to stress in general. So how to know which organ system to target? That's kind of the whole art and science of herbalism. You really need to understand how the organs function and what symptoms go with which organs. So Chinese medicine is a great place to look for these kind of associations. Typically, you really want like a herbalist or a naturopathic doctor to figure out what organ system is dysfunctional, because there's a lot of layers of complexity to this. Like just because something seems like it's related to one organ, it doesn't mean that another organ isn't causing that dysfunction under the surface. It's the idea of treating the root cause of things, the deepest cause, not just the surface level. And then there's the specificity of herbs. This is the third aspect of picking out the right herb. So we got the energetics, the hot, cold, dry, and damp. We have the organ system. Now we know which organ it goes to. And then we have the specificity. The specificity is basically the overall symptom picture that the herb goes for. This is that explanation of, this herb is great for people who have cold hands, but they're also sweating a lot, but they have a cough, et cetera, et cetera. These are like combinations of systems that this one herb is just really good for doing that. And specifics are kind of like, no one knows why they do that. They just happen to. Like a specific of ginger, for example, is anti-nausea. Ginger is one of the best nausea remedies that I've ever had. It's actually sometimes works where pharmaceuticals don't work for people. That's a specific of ginger. It's really good for the kind of nausea that happens from like an upset stomach. The eclectics were very big on using this aspect of herbalism. I have here included a link to one of my favorite materia medicas, a Felter. He was an eclectic physician. And they really went so deep into how herbs work that they had a whole picture. The herbs almost had a kind of personality to them where they did, if it was this kind of person, the herb would work for them, type of thing. Here's an example of sage. So this is from the Materia Medica of Felter, Salvia officinalis. So the specific indications are the person's skin is soft, their extremities are cold, their circulation is weak, their urine's very clear, and they are sweating a lot. So the action is that it helps for, they call it a feeble tonic, meaning it's something that's helpful for people that are feeling feeble, like weakness of the body. And it's also very astringent and diaphoretic. They use the infusion for a gargle, for inflamed throat. But if you take it warm, it helps you sweat. So if anyone, can anyone guess what pattern sage works on and what are the energetics based on what was said? So this herb is an astringent and it's also a diaphoretic. And you use it when the skin is soft and relaxed. So basically this herb would be, it would be a drying herb, specific for damp relaxation. So it's used for excess sweating, like excess fluid, damp. And it's also very astringent, meaning it's a drying. So what we'll see is that these terms that you read in herbal books, like astringent, they have deeper meaning than just astringent. They mean that it's dry also. So here's some modern vocabulary. You guys can go through these on your own. These are pretty simplified explanations of what the different words mean, like anodynes, pain reliever, antispasmodic, reduces muscle tension, pain and spasm, carminatives, expel gas, etc. Diuretics promote urination, febrifuge reduces fever. You guys can look through these. You can just pause on the slides. So when you're going through any herb book you have, they might just say, oh, this is a demulcent cathartic or something. And unless you understand what that term means, you won't know what it does. This is where modern herbalism connects with ancient herbalism. It's essentially the key that brings together ancient and modern herbalism, because in a lot of these herb books, it'll just say it's antiseptic, right? If you ever read any PubMed research, you'll say this herb has been found to be antispasmodic and antiseptic. Not only does it mean antiseptic that it's antibacterial, and not only does antispasmodic mean it's against spasms or relaxes muscles, but it also, antiseptic means that it's warming. Antiseptic herbs in general are very warm herbs. It's why you have things that garlic, one of the best antibiotic natural substances, incredibly hot, right? I mean, you eat it, you start sweating, it burns, it's painful. I'd like to chew raw garlic with honey sometimes, just to really make sure the cold just doesn't have a chance when you do that. So the antiseptic herbs are very warming. And this goes along with all the different kinds of terms used to explain them, like astringent, that's like a drying one. Demulcent, that's a damp herb. Antispasmodic is for damp stagnation. It relaxes. And then you have the organ-specific terms. So sometimes they'll say, this is a hepatic trophorestorative. That means it's a liver restorative herb. And you guys can use this for reference. And here's where the kind of the energetics coincide with the pharmacology. So for the hot state, you give a cool herb. The taste tends to be sour. And what is in these kind of herbs is flavonoids in general. So these are antioxidants, they're anti-inflammatory. So for a hot state, you want flavonoids. For a cold state, you want aromatics. The aromatic herbs like rosemary are very heating. So they help for these cold states. For a dry state, you want the mucilages, carbohydrates. For a damp state, you want the bitters. So this gives you a kind of, this allows all those terms to intersect. So it allows the energetics to intersect with the modern herbalist terms, to also intersect with the pharmacology that you might read in some research paper that, oh, this is very high in flavonoids. What does that mean? Cool, right? So why did I spend so much time on this general theory? What this helps is it will actually allow you to understand the herbs rather than just memorizing lists of like how they work. You'll be able to understand, oh, it's a cold dry herb. Okay, this will be perfect for this. And it allows you to experiment. It allows you to take an herb and have a language for describing how it works, because nobody, eats an herb and says, oh, this must be high in flavonoids. But this is the way modern botanical research is done. It's not done in an experiential way. It's done in a kind of chemistry way. But this allows you to connect that chemistry to your own experience. Also allows you to pick out an herb, right? Okay, somebody comes in and, maybe you're having anxiety, or maybe your friend's having anxiety, and they're asking you, oh, you're into herbs and stuff. What herb can I take, right? And then you go on the internet and you search anti-anxiety herbs, and you literally, there's like 50 herbs, and you're like, which herb? Well, using the system of energetics and the organ system, you can come together for what is the most bang for your buck herb that you can make into a really strong tincture or really strong tea. There's, of course, formulation of herbs, but that gets very complex. So really understanding how single herbs work in very high doses and picking the right perfect one, it's pretty much miraculous in its effect if you get it right on the dot. And that's where herbalism becomes a very powerful modality. So for example, if a person, let's say they were feeling really anxious, or you're feeling anxious, and you also notice that you get a really upset stomach every time you're feeling anxious. And you notice that you have a lot of gas, and your mind is kind of like racing kind of thing. So we have the three aspects there of what the herb could be. So you have anxiety. That's a stimulated condition. That's a hot condition, right? So we already want to pick a cool herb, probably. That already narrows down like 50% of the herbs that are probably good. Then you also have this other weird symptom with your anxiety, that your stomach gets kind of upset. You get kind of, nervous stomach kind of thing. So that you want an herb that's probably specific to the nervous system, but more so even to the stomach. You want something that's good for both. And then the specifics, the other symptoms you have, you get gassy or something like that when you're anxious. I don't know if that's anybody here, but so the herb you would pick is probably lemon balm, because it fits all three things. It's cooling for that hot. It's anti-anxiety and specific to the stomach for the indigestion. And it also fits the other symptom picture. So you make a super, super strong lemon balm tea, or you take some tincture, and voila, that's it. That's pretty much the whole art of Western herbalism in a nutshell. So I'm not expecting you guys to remember all this. That's why I'm going to give you the slides. But you'll see that this is very helpful, especially if I don't know if you guys are familiar with Matthew Wood. This is called The Earthwise Herbal. If you are familiar with him as an herbalist, I highly recommend this book. And also this book, it's called The Practice of Traditional Western Herbalism. This goes in deep into this theory that I was explaining in its simplicity. A lot of herbalists will not explain what the terms mean. They'll just say this herb has a sweet taste and it's dry. So That's where you can kind of understand more what the herbs do. And as I was saying, it allows you to figure out for yourself, you know, did you try chewing on some herb and you notice it kind of has this astringency? Well, maybe it's a dry herb. Probably is. So now you know that it would be good for something that was kind of a lot of fluid and excess fluid discharges. All right, so we're going to take a little break right here for about, let's do like 10 minutes. And we'll come back and we will go into several of the herbs that you guys requested, and you'll see how this the stuff I explained first is like your vegetables. You need your vegetables to be healthy, but this is where the stuff gets fun because you start understanding what the herbs really do. You get a very complex picture of the herb function. All right, so you guys can take a break. If you're planning on making a tincture, get your supplies together as well. And I'll be doing a demonstration of a tincture. I'll be making calendula and a red clover tincture. So, get your alcohol or glycerin or vinegar or whatever solvent you want to use. I recommend alcohol, but if you don't have that, you can just make a tea. And you're going to need some kind of like mason jar with a closed lid. And that's pretty much it. The amazing thing about tincturing is that those tinctures that you buy at the store for like $20, you can make it for like 10 times cheaper with even better ingredients. So let's say you really like a certain kind of tincture, like you really like passion flower tincture, but passion flower tincture is $20. Well, if you buy a bunch of organic dried passion flower, like a pound of it, and you put that pound into a extract tincture, you'll have passion flower tincture for all year for actually probably about the price of the tincture, which is kind of insane. So tinctures are awesome, is what I'm saying. But anyways, we can take a break now as well. Yeah, those firstly, I remember from your email. Passion flower, valerian, hops, chamomile, skullcap, etc., are really good for a sleep tincture. I actually make one for my company. It has passion flower, hops, and lavender and chamomile. And I've heard a lot of people saying that it's very helpful. So that's a good mixture, first off. Second off, okay, so you have a quart of vodka.
Yeah, I mean, I could use less, but I thought I might as well make a quart.
Yeah, you should. You should make as much as you can, for sure. Basically, what I would say, so this is kind of the folk method of tincturing. I'll go into the more like scientific measuring method with the specific milliliters and grams, but for home use, that's not really necessary. Basically, the rule you want to keep in mind is you want your herbs, when you put them in the mason jar, to be covered by about at least an inch. And that's all you need to know.
Oh, okay.
Make sure it just covers it by an inch. And then you don't need to worry about specific amounts or anything like that. You want to probably make it as strong as possible.
So I don't, like valerian seems to work really well. I don't want to put more valerian in than other things, for example.
Oh, you want to know about the proportions too?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess it depends on what kind. Is this for you?
Yeah, it's for me.
Okay. What kind of sleep issues do you have? Is it like trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep? Are you anxious at night?
Trouble staying
thoughts?
asleep.
Trouble staying asleep.
Yeah.
Okay. So for trouble staying asleep, you're going to want to go heavier on the valerian.
Okay.
I probably would put like 50% valerian.
Okay.
And it's pretty, since it's the root, it takes up very little space. So that should be pretty easy.
Okay.
As far as the other ones, hops, you probably don't want to put too much. Just a little bit. Hops is really strong, really takes over the flavor, and you don't need much of it. And then the passion flower and skullcap could just be equal amounts. So you can do like half valerian, maybe like a third passion flower. No, like equal amounts of passion wire skullcap, and then just maybe like a handful of hops would be good.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. And also, while I'm here in this view, does anyone have any questions so far about what we talked about, or just like any general herb questions? I'd be happy to answer them. Like if there's an herb you want to know something about, or if you had like some specific thing and you wanted me to give you my 2 cents on it.
Hi, my name is Cassandra.
Cassandra.
I responded too late to your email in order for you to, use it in the presentation. But I was wondering if you knew anything about Japanese knotweed.
No, I do not. I do not, unfortunately.
Because it's very popular to use for treating Lyme disease. And but I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough work with researching it to.
Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Yeah. I'll look it up.
I'm sorry about asking that. I didn't want to.
Oh, don't be sorry. No, this class is for you guys.
Maybe some other people might be interested because obviously Lyme disease is spreading rapidly everywhere.
Yeah. Is this the knotweed that's called Polygonum aviculare, or are you not sure about that?
I mean, all I know is that from other herbalists, it can grow. It can grow like wild, like it could grow in your backyard type of thing.
This looks like this one.
It's not native to this country, I don't think. I think
it says it's native to Europe.
Yeah, so I don't think it's technically like a weed here, like with how it grows, but it's not native to this area, and that's why they call it, I guess, Japanese knotweed. I'm not sure why else, but it's very like barky, because it's like very. I think you use the bark of it primarily, because I remember I have some of it, but I don't have it with me right now to show.
Okay.
And it's
I think
hard and dry type of material when you're using it as a dried herb.
Yeah, so it says here that knotweed is part of the rhubarb family. It's damp, so it's mucilaginous and it's cooling in general. It contains mucilages, as I said, has flavonoids. It says in this herb book, at least, that it's used a lot to clear mucus and for coughs and bronchitis and other lung disorders, also for night sweats. Also used as diuretic to increase urination. And it looks like it lowers blood pressure, but I'm not sure if this is exactly the Japanese version of it, because there's quite a few in this family.
Well, I can see if I can find the actual Latin name for you. I don't want to take up more of the class time, but thank you so much for at least.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right, by a show of hands, who is ready to make a tincture today? All right, we got a few hands here. Awesome. Sweet. So for the people who aren't making a tincture, you'll have the slides so you can make it on your own. It's also incredibly easy, so you probably won't even need to look back through the slides to know how to do it. Today, I'm going to be making a tincture with fresh calendula. See that beautiful orange leaves?
Very pretty.
If you guys like fresh herbs, I highly recommend Pacific Botanicals. They're a farm that I get my supply from. They have pretty good quality dried herbs in general, but their fresh herbs are really nice because you basically call them, see what they have in season, and they'll just ship it to you. They have their own farm. So great resource. Fresh herbs are always stronger and always more medicinal in my experience. So if you could get it fresh, do it. The beautiful thing about living out here in the Pacific Northwest is that there's literally medicinal herbs growing everywhere in people's like yards, on the side streets. Probably don't want to get it off the road nearby because it's probably polluted. But if you find it in like a field, like I've seen St. John's wort in huge patches. The mint family ones, like rosemary, is just pretty much everywhere. Lemon balm just grows all over the place. Most of the herbs that you can make some solid tinctures with are just all over the place. So that's always a great resource. Also, it's nice to connect with the herbs. I know a few of you were saying that you have experience harvesting mushrooms and also other herbs. So it gives you that nice like connection to the medicine that I think makes it much more healing than, just buying it in a store or even just buying it dried or something like that. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a preferred way of storing fresh herbs if you like harvest from your backyard or something?
Yeah, there's a few options there. Typically, I tincture them because tincture is gonna be the most preservative method. Because if you take your fresh herbs and you make a tincture, it's good for like maybe ever. I mean, most people say like 5-10 years, but you probably can preserve it for longer than that. So tincturing would be my go-to. These herbs that I got, I put in the freezer and I try to use them as quick as possible. You want to cover it, put it in the freezer. Obviously they go bad pretty well. They're kind of like, like vegetables or like lettuce where they start wilting and getting kind of funky, just even a few days being in the fridge. So really like, you want to make something from it the day of would be ideal. Like if you wanted to make like a cream or an oil or something like that, you just do it the day of. What's cool about this? So this method of tincturing pretty much applies to making creams, salves, oils, glycerites, fire cider, whatever. It's all the same method. So I'll be teaching the method of tincturing and then you can apply it to anything you want. The only real difference between making like oils and creams is that generally for oils, I'd recommend you do it under heat, like low heat over several hours. If you're gonna so calendula is made into an oil pretty frequently. It's really good for wounds and like skin conditions, so they make it into an oil. What you would do with it is you would get a pot, get a bunch of your favorite oil that you want to use. It could be the ones typically used in creams. Pretty much most oils will work. I mean, olive oil works just fine. So it's just your preference and the cost. Some oils are really expensive to make a gigantic thing out of. But basically what you would do with that is you'd put it on low heat in the oil. You probably want to chop up the herbs too a little bit. I like to use just like a blender or a coffee grinder or anything like that. And you boil it for probably about 4 to 6 hours at super low heat. If you have a double boiler, you would probably want to use that. Otherwise, you're going to have to, attend to it every 20 or 30 minutes to stir it to make sure it doesn't, boil over. But super low, keep a top on it, and you'll know it's ready. Like things like calendula and stuff, like it's going to be very colorful. The oil that comes out of it, it's going to be beautiful. If you have St. John's wort or something, it has this beautiful red, crimson type of hue. So that's how you know the oil's ready, is when it's got that deep color. And then so that's the same thing with tinctures. You could do them heated or not. I'll go through the process. But the only really difference for creams and salves, one thing is you want to refrigerate the oil that you make. Also, if you're going to make it into a cream or salve, there's different preservatives that you want to use. There's natural ones, like vitamin C is an example. But you want to have a good amount. I think it's vitamin E and vitamin C. And there's basically just look up preservative kind of thing for oils. The reason is that creams and salves, they can spoil, whereas tinctures do not spoil. So you definitely want to add some kind of preservative to it, or else you're going to get some funky cream that you're going to put on your body. and you don't want that unless you're going to use it all in a couple of days. But yeah, typically once that oil is ready, you just mix it in with some kind of base. Like some people really like melting beeswax, a little bit of it, and then mixing it with like shea butter or something like that. There's like a million options. You can do coconut oil. Basically, you take that oil and you put it into like a harder kind of oil. You melt it all together, and the beeswax helps it keep a little bit of its consistency. Like if you wanted to use it as a lip balm or something. But that's basically it. Yeah, you just make the cream, and then you can put anything you want in it and just put it on your body. Cool thing about creams is it actually goes into your body, so it's not only just on the surface. They're very cool when you make them with alcohol, because alcohol is obviously, it's made up of water and alcohol. That's why it's like 40 or 50%. So tinctures will pull out a lot of the water soluble ingredients, things like the polysaccharides in mushrooms, for example. A lot of mushrooms, the water based part is what you can pull out. And then it also pulls out the essential oils and the kind of fats that are in it. The alcohol does that. So with the tincture, you get really the complete spectrum of the plant. You get all the things that are soluble in water. So like that water can pull out, things that tea can pull out. And you also get all the things that oil can pull out into the alcohol. So that's, of course, very useful. They're super convenient because you can make them very concentrated and just carry them around with you. So I love just carrying around a tincture in my pocket throughout the day. They are pretty easy to make, and also, molds and things like that. If you have like a 40% or above alcohol, you don't have to worry about things like that. With creams, you kind of have to worry about it spoiling and that kind of thing. Also, even with glycerites, you have to worry a little bit about keeping the water in it very low. You want to use mostly glycerin if you're going to make a glycerite, because that can also spoil, but alcohol will not spoil. Here we go. Yeah. So what can you use? So you guys may have an assortment of things. One of you said that you had vodka. That's a good choice. Brandy is also really nice. I don't know if you like Damiana, but it goes very good with Damiana. You can also use Everclear. So Everclear is what I use. This is Everclear. It's like a large bottle of it. The benefit of using Everclear as an extract is that it's 95% alcohol. So basically what that means is that you can get the percentage of alcohol that you want. Some plants tincture best at 20% alcohol. Some tincture best at 75% alcohol. There's a chart including here to tell you which is which and which percentage to use if you want to be, get the maximum potency out of it. It's not necessary. Most plants will do just fine around 40, 50%. But this allows you to make any percentage you want because you could water it down. So this is 95%. Let's call it 100%. If you wanted to make, a 50% alcohol, you just add half water to this and that's it. You got a 50% alcohol. If you wanted to make a 75% alcohol, you add a quarter of water to this and then you have a 75%. In general, as I was saying, alcohol pulls out fat soluble things. So things that are very high in essential oils are going to be better in higher percentage extracts. So if you have some lavender or something like that, you're going to want to do like a 60%, 70%, 75%. If you have cannabis, also very high in oils, they make the butters and things like that. It's very THC and CBD is very lipid soluble, fat soluble. You're going to want to use a higher percentage alcohol for that, like 75%. Things like myrrh and frankincense, if you wanted to venture to make a tincture out of that, you're going to be using like 90% alcohol. So you're pretty much just putting Everclear in there. If you're using like medicinal mushrooms, you're actually going to want to go pretty low. You're going to want to go like 20% alcohol. All this stuff is included in the chart, but just to give you like a rough, because you might not be able to find out which one, but if it's like very fragrant and it seems to be high in essential oils, use higher percent, like even go above 50% if you want, or you can just do 50%. It'll still be good regardless. As I was saying, you could also make tinctures with apple cider vinegar. That's basically a fire cider. There's a recipe I like to use. I made it a few times. It's fresh ginger, garlic, onions, and horseradish. And you put it in, you blend it or chop it up and put it in apple cider vinegar and you leave it for like a month or two. And then it makes the most delicious vinegar that you can drink, shots of to, burn the hair out of your nostrils, and also to add to like oils for salads. I find that's a very delicious use. And you can actually not even filter out all the garlic and things and just have that. You could just mix it into food, pour it on salad, etc. That's really good for, especially approaching into, flu season and all that. It wouldn't hurt to just drink fire cider every day. As I was saying, also with glycerin, has anyone here used any glycerites or bought them or anything like that? Glycerin is this like sweet byproduct of manufacturing, which is, it's kind of like a syrup. It's weird because it can actually pull a lot of things that other substances can't. It doesn't pull as well as alcohol. The only reason you'd really want to use glycerin is if you don't want to use alcohol, like if it's maybe for a child or they're sensitive to alcohol or they're recovering, things like that. You wouldn't want to use alcohol. Great for kids because they're delicious. Like, especially if you use some aromatic herbs. I have a blend. It's sleep blends and also a blend of Blissful Soul, which is like for mood support that I make. It has St. John's wort, it has milky oats, it has passion flower, it has lavender. And when you make it into a glycerite, it's so delicious. It has like this aromatic kind of floral taste, but it's really sweet, like a syrup. So people love using it. So if they're good for like people who aren't really into herbs, because it kind of is like a soft entry point into it. But for the real herbalist, you're going to want to go with an alcohol tincture probably, just because it pulls out a little bit more. So here's the chart. You guys are going to have this for your own use. This goes through all the herbs with their common name and Latin name. It tells you which part of the herb to use. Super important if you're using an herb for the first time, because some of the parts are toxic and some of them are very helpful. So you definitely want to know which part you're going to want to use. Tells you when to harvest it, meaning you want to go look around for it or order it. Another thing it tells you is how they're best tinctured. So some plants are really good dry tinctured and some are really good fresh, and some are good if you mix them both together. You can kind of look through. So let's see. Calendula officinalis, calendula flower, spring, fall. It's best in dry. I have fresh. So that's what it is. I'm going with that. Let's see what else we have.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Is this chart something that you found from, is it from like a publication, or did you put it together based off of your knowledge or experience?
It's from a publication. It's from a book that I cite at the end. It's called Herbal Medicine from the Heart of the Earth. There'll be a picture of it. Okay. It's one of my favorite ones. Highly recommend it to you guys, especially if you want to learn all the different crafts, because it has instructions of how to make an oil, a cream, a salve, a poultice, which is where you take a bunch of herbs and you kind of just put it on your skin. It has how you make an elixir even, which is this weird thing that I didn't know about. It actually is a specific term in herbalism for kind of like low alcohol infusion. How to make teas, etc. It has all those crafting stuff, and then also has really good explanations of the herbs. And it tells you the energetics, but it doesn't go into depth on what they mean. So that's what these notes will be useful for that. So what herbs are we using here? Let's see if I can find one of your
May
guys.
I ask a question real quick?
Please.
On one of them, it said to harvest it at full moon. Why would you do that?
Yes, so that's for the mugwort. It's a magical tradition. It has to do with its magical properties. So mugwort is associated with Artemis, the goddess of the moon, as you may have seen in the slides. It's this kind of old folk belief that's present in a lot of alchemical medicine. If you're interested in the kind of astrological aspects of medicine and kind of the metaphysical, you're definitely going to want to look into Nicholas Culpeper, spelled Culpepper. I have his book somewhere, but I'm not going to grab it. He was an English herbalist of about the 1500s, and he was very big on finding the astrological correspondences with the herbs. So like St. John's wort, for example, is an herb of the sun, Mugwort is an herb of the moon. So there are these beliefs that somehow the energy of the sun or moon can make these remedies more potent. So if you were going to make a mugwort tincture or something of that nature, and you want it to be really fancy, you could leave it out in the moonlight and see if that does anything. You can also infuse it with gemstones and things like that. One of my friends, herbalist, who also has a herbal tincturing company, actually adds like gemstones into her tinctures. So that's kind of interesting idea.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks.
Okay, so what herbs are we using here today?
Like the ones we've gathered.
Yeah.
I have mint from my
Mints.
Yeah.
I have lemon balm.
Perfect. Okay, so we have mentha piperita. That's peppermint.
I have bilberry.
Cool. Okay, perfect. So we got peppermints. So you'd want to use fresh and dry, but if you only have dry, that's fine. You only have fresh, that's fine. If you see here this best strength thing, that means the proportion that it's best extracted in. So it's, for example, for mint, it's 1 to 1/4. That's a very specific number. You probably don't have to be so crazy about it. You could probably just do 1 to 1/5. What that means is it's parts of herb per parts of extracted fluid. So what that means, and it's in grams and milliliters. If you want to be really scientific about how you make your tincture for peppermints, you would want to weigh out 1 part of herb in grams for 1.5 parts of milliliters of liquid.
Okay.
So that scales to whatever. So quick example, if you have 100 grams of peppermint that you're trying to make into a tincture, you put in 150 milliliters of liquid. Usually you end up pretty much having to double that. You'll see when you make the tincture that sometimes you will follow instructions like this and there won't be enough alcohol to cover it. You always kind of want to cover it by like 1/2 inch at least, or 1 inch. You want it to get maximum absorption. But these are kind of some rough guides. Other ones like, Mahonia, Oregon grape that grows around here all over the place. If you live by the Willamette, it grows all up and down, just everywhere. That one you would do 1 to 5 ratio. So 1 gram per 5 milliliters. So if you had 100 grams of it, you would put 500 milliliters. That is the very scientific method of it, or you can just do the folk method. Either way works fine. Folk method is faster. Scientific method lets you experiment more, because if you make something really good, you'll know like what you did, so you can remake it. That would probably be the benefit of it. But it's like cooking. Some people follow recipes, and some people, like my mom, just use pinches of stuff, and it's great. So whatever floats your boat. So for this one, as you see, for the mints, we're going to be using 65%. So if you have a vodka, that's fine. If you have an Everclear, you would just mix it with 1/3 water. Lemon balm is 45%. So if you have a vodka, you're good to go. And then bilberry. So that's vaccinium. Yep. Bilberry is 50%. So if you have vodka, that's fine. If you have Everclear, mix it with 1/2 water. What else?
I have mugwort.
Doesn't seem to be here for some reason. It is pretty fragrant. It's pretty high in essential oils. So if you have Everclear, I'd probably, put like 1/3 water into it. But if you have vodka, that's fine.
Yeah,
And
vodka.
perfect. Okay. So that works fine. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. That's how you'd use like a chard like that. This is the book I was talking about that the chart comes from. It's called Herbal Medicine from the Heart of the Earth. And this I'll leave you guys with if you want to use the scientific method. This basically explains everything I said in more depth of how many grams to use per milliliter, just so you don't forget, the percentages, the blending that you can use. This is the folk method. This is what we're doing. So we are the folk herbalists. All right. So let us begin. So grab your herbs. So I have a large mason jar here. You can use smaller ones. I really like mason jars because you really don't want to use any kind of plastic container because the alcohol can actually leach the plastic. So you definitely always want to use glass, especially for alcohol tinctures. So mason jars are great for that. And they also seal on the top, which you're going to need. Basically what you do for the folk method, take your jar. Let's see if I can do this. And you put your herbs into it. So if you have your herbs in your jar, you can start going along with it. Oh, they smell amazing. Beautiful orange color. It's going to make an excellent tincture. Another thing you can do too that's pretty cool is you can actually make a tincture and then you can kind of get it pretty watered down, not watered down rather. You can put it on heat and evaporate out a lot of the liquid to make it really concentrated. And you can take that little bit of extracted fluid and you could mix it into a cream. So if you want to make a cream in that method, it'll work just fine. So if you want to make a strong tincture out of this and then mix it into a kind of cream, you're going to want to have a lot of base in terms of, oil and stuff because it'll be pretty watery otherwise. But this kind of shows you that what you make with this tincture has multiple uses. Also, what you could do with tinctures is you can make yourself really delicious shots. I really like Damiana and brandy, as I said. If you want to make something really delicious, I'll share one of my personal favorite recipes that I heard from a podcast with an herbalist. It's basically Damiana, which is this really fragrant nervine, delicious aroma and taste. So it's Damiana, rosebuds, red rosebuds, vanilla bean, and then you add brandy to it. So you tincture it in some good high quality brandy, which is a wine alcohol. Then, so you make a tincture out of that, as I'm doing here. Then when the tincture's finished, you add maple syrup to it, and you will have the most delicious shots of all time that also have a lot of other effects because Damiana is pretty calming and relaxing. So it's basically like an infused alcohol. So it'll give you a little bit more than just a vodka shot would give you in terms of effects on the mind. You can do that basically with any herb, which is really cool. And I'm still trying to figure out why there isn't like herb bars where they do that, because I don't know about you guys, but how awesome would that be if you could get a shot of lavender vodka and just feel so chilled out after that? You know what I mean? All right. Does everybody have their herbs in the container? So this is my container. It's chock full of calendula. It looks pretty awesome. It looks like a thing of jelly beans. So we're almost done once you get this in here. If we were doing the scientific method of it, you know, I would have seen how much I had of this. I would have weighed this in how many grams, and I would have used that like 1-to-5 ratio formula or 1-to-8 to figure out how much liquid I would need. Then I would figure out what percentage alcohol I needed, and I would make it with the water. So I would have everything ready before I even did this, measured out. And then I would know how much fluid to add for the maximum extraction and what percentage to add. And then I would mix it all together. So the folk method is just much easier. You literally just grab the herb, put it in there, and now we're going to put alcohol and water into it if you're using Everclear or just alcohol. All right, step 2. I have a bottle of Everclear. And I have some water. And for the folk method, I'm not going to be measuring it. So basically, I'm going to want to put about, this jar is going to need to be covered pretty near to the brim so that it has maximum extraction. So I'm going to mix my water in. Then I'm going to mix my alcohol in. So I got roughly about a 50% tincture from the amount I used. So that's all in there. Now I'm going to grab a spoon. Or a knife. What you could do here with this mixture, if you want to increase the extraction potency, is you would literally take this mixture or mix it in to a blender and just blend it all together. Like literally just throw the herbs in the blender, put in the water, put in the alcohol, and just blend it all together until you make a kind of slush. And then you would put it in this jar. That's if you want to get really maximum extraction. But I think these flowers are so beautiful that I kind of want to leave them in their whole form because I think it'll look really cool when it's finished on top of being very, very potent. So we got that. You're going to want to kind of mix it around a little bit to make sure it's all covered. It smells so good. All right. Now you put the top onto it and you would just stir it, kind of shake it up. And you're going to want to put it in a dark place. That's relatively room temperature-ish. You don't want it in high heat or low heat. You also don't want it to be like, unless you're trying to make like a solar infusion or something of that nature, you don't want it to be in direct sunlight because it might degrade some of the medicinal components. So you want to kind of put it in a dark cupboard, and then you can shake it every day or every few days or not at all. Set intentions. If you shake it more, it'll extract faster. And then in about 3 to 4 weeks, you're going to come back to it. And then once you come back to it, it's going to be all extracted. So like you'll notice like the fluid will be a different color. You can even taste it with a little spoon and see basically what you want. You'll know it's ready when you taste a little bit of it and it just tastes like that herb a lot. Because in the beginning, like if I just tasted some of this right now, it would just be disgusting. It would just taste like Everclear with some plant flavor. But if I let this sit for about 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to taste like calendula. So going based off taste and aroma, that's how you'll know when it's finished. But in general, about a month is what you're aiming for. Pro tip, I do this. Let's say you just don't want to wait. Let's say you were really excited about the tincturing and you didn't think it would take a month. Well, it doesn't have to take a month. If you're impatient like me, you can basically take this mason jar, right? Closed top, put it in a pot with water in it. Boil the water with the jar basically just sitting in it. So the jar is like sitting in the pot. This is so that it's not like directly contacting the flame because it'll get too hot. And then you do that, let it sit in there for like 4 hours, 2 hours, whatever. You can do this with oils. It's really good with oils. This is basically the super quick way it's essentially an improvised double boiler is what it really is. But if you have a double boiler, that's even better. The idea is like, if you put, herbs into a pan with some alcohol, it's going to get really, really hot and it's going to evaporate out all the water and alcohol. You don't want that. So what happens is the water that's in there, it keeps it at a stable temperature. It can't go above 100 Celsius or 172 Fahrenheit. So it won't evaporate out the water or the alcohol. So that's what you want. So yeah, if you want to speed it up tonight, you can set it in a pot, have it heat up. You'll notice it starts changing colors and the aroma and everything. And that's how you do that. There's also a lot of tools you can use to do it quicker. I have a thing called the magic butter machine, really good for making oils. It's specifically designed to make cannabis infused oils. Really good. You just set it and you forget it. You check a temperature, you set it and it will even stir itself for itself. So it pretty much just does it. So that if you make a lot of tinctures and oils, that might be a worthy investment. It's about like $130. Yeah. And it'll be quick. It'll be done the same day. So this is the shaking up aspect. You label it with the date for sure. Like you'll forget. It's guaranteed you'll forget unless you made a rosemary tincture and you start taking it every day in the meanwhile. But yeah, label with the date so you know when it's ready essentially. Also, if you use a lot of funky herbs, label with herb too, because that's also easily forgettable. They're like 9 times out of 10 when I just make tinctures and kind of forget about them, I'll have to smell check them to figure out what herb it is. And if it's a mixture of herbs, good luck. So it's good to know what herbs used. This is the heat extraction method. Okay, so when that's all done, like let's say use the heating method, or let's fast forward into time about 4 weeks and that tincture is done. I would get onto the final thing, the thing that makes it a tincture, and that's the purification. So basically what you do is preferably you want one of these tincture bags because they're really good. You can go to like an herb shop and get one. Dragon Herbarium's a really good one to get these kind of bags, or you can just order them online. Literally just look up filter bag. If you're planning on making tinctures, this is going to save you so much stress.
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
That I use. You can get things like at Bimart, these jelly filter bags. Those are less expensive and they work really well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't know that was an option. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. Thank you for suggesting that.
Sure.
You can also use like a cheesecloth, but it's more annoying to do it that way, but it'll work. So if you can't get your hands on a filter bag or a jelly bag, just get a cheesecloth. And you would literally, you would put the cheesecloth over another jar and you would pour it through, and then the herbs would get stuck and then you would squeeze it out. It's like the same way you make cheese, but except it's a tincture. Also, if you really don't have any of those things and you're trying to do it yourself at home, you can use just like a cloth t-shirt. I've done that before when I've made San Pedro mixes for myself, and it works. So that's always an option. So these are the instructions, pretty self-explanatory. What you're trying to do is pour that through, filter out the herbs, and now you have an extracted liquid. And that's it. You have that extracted liquid. You can pour it into these like 1 ounce or 2 ounce, 4 ounce bottles that you can buy, or you can just keep them in small mason jars or just wherever it is and pour yourself a little bit of every once in a while. Use it how you wish. I like to add honey to my tinctures because it's delicious, makes them taste really good, makes you want to take them more often. So honey is really good, like raw honey, or Maple syrup goes really good in tinctures, or, anything you'd like. You could add other flavors. You could add other spice herbs into your tincture. Like if you had some cloves on hand, you can just kind of pop them in. If you have any other spices that you use for cooking and you want to give it a nice little flavor, you can throw some in there too. Like orange peel is really good for that. Lemon peels, all the hot herbs. All right, so that's tincturing. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Are there any herbs you shouldn't mix together, or any like honey or something you shouldn't mix into something?
So the herbs you shouldn't mix together, I don't know of any herbs that you shouldn't mix together, other than maybe very potent herbs that are already in and of themselves pretty low dose. Like aconite or something is already pretty dangerous on its own. You wouldn't want to make a tincture out of aconite ever. It's very, very potent herb, and it's pretty poisonous if you use it in any, significant amounts. Any herb that's like low dose. If you ever see like a low dose herb, they usually don't just like sell them. You have to ask for them, kind of thing, or they'll sell them at a shop, but they won't, they'll have like a red sticker on them or something. Those herbs you don't want to make tinctures out of, unless you want to like make a tincture and just use like a drop of them or something, but I wouldn't even mess around with that. Other than that, most herbs you can mix together. If you can take them alone, you can take them together. And what was the second question?
Like if you added any kind of like honey or something to something, if it would.
Yeah, you don't want to add raw honey for children under 2 years old. That general recommendation, you probably saw it on honey. It's really weird. It's for botulism, a toxin. They're more sensitive to it. Adults are fine with raw honey, but yeah, you don't want to give anyone under 2 years old raw honey unless you know that the source is 100% safe. Other than that.
So, and it doesn't change the potency to add the maple syrup or the honey or something to something?
Not really. So you want to add the honey or the maple syrup after you got the extract. So you're not going to add it in like right now. You're going to wait till it's finished tincturing. You're going to add it to the fluid. So that gets rid of any like anything that can happen in terms of the extraction or the potency. It won't change the potency much unless you use a lot of honey. I mean, if I used like, a gallon of honey, this would be half strength, but very honey flavored. It would be like a syrup.
Okay.
Yeah, and the method applies to pretty much everything. You can just use this method with just water and elderberries and make an elderberry syrup the same way you make other kinds of syrups. The principles are what's important. You have some kind of fluid and you have an herb. You put it in the fluid, and if you add heat, it'll be faster. That's pretty much it. There's nothing more complex. Everything is just little tweaks for potency.
I've read that sometimes that elderberry can be dangerous.
In what context?
I don't like just eating it.
Yeah, so elderberry actually has 3 different parts that's used. Sometimes it's the leaves, sometimes it's the bark, and sometimes it's the berry. The berry, you can go, hog wild and eat those berries pretty much, as far as I know. The bark, though, if you're going to use the bark, it is generally low dose because elder bark is really one of those terms used before, cathartic. So the cathartic herbs are ones that will literally make you vomit and have diarrhea.
Oh.
So if you have a really strong elder bark, that's what it will do. That's actually its medicinal use. That's how it's used. It's used to make somebody like, somebody who has a lot of toxic buildup. It's for them to purge. So that's kind of its healing potency. But yeah, it's toxic in higher amounts. That's why it caused that response. That's another going back to that point about know which part of the herb to use, because like elderberry, you can eat it all day and you're fine. A little bit of elder bark too much, and like you're gonna have a bad day.
And what about chasteberry?
Chasteberry, The berry itself is pretty safe. It shouldn't really be used during pregnancy. It could mess people up during pregnancy because it has pretty strong effects on hormones like estrogen. It's in regular doses, it's relatively safe. It's not anything that there's any particular warnings about. Like some other herbs, there can be allergic reactions to them, but mostly not. What you can always do if you're trying a new herb or something in your garden that you've never tried is make a tincture or a tea or whatever, and just try a little bit of it and see if you're fine with it. If you are, like, you're good. It's if you want to be extra careful, because some, especially even common ones, some people are allergic to chamomile. It's pretty dang rare, but it's possible. You never know. Allergies are weird. It can happen to anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into the herbs. All right, so we're at time, but I am 100% willing to keep going and finish up these herbs because this is kind of the juicy, fun part of the class. So does anybody need to leave within the next certain amount of time? No? Okay.
But, well, I'm sorry. I actually have to, but I arrived late as well. I see it's recorded. Is there a way that it can be sent to me at a later date?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is recorded and I'll be sending the link when it's uploaded. So yeah, you'll be able to see it all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into all the fun herbs. All right, so we're starting out with mugwort. So mugwort is bitter, damp, and warm. So if you remember, let me move this thing out of the way, sorry. There we go. Yeah, so mugwort is bitter, damp, and warm. So the bitters are generally the warm herbs. They're very stimulating. So anything that's a bitter is going to help digestion. That's why mugwort is actually good for digestive issues. And it's also warm. So it's stimulating and it's good for the kind of cold conditions that we talked about. It's used for cold and dry conditions. So those kind of slowed down, sedated processes and the dryness, the kind of, like withering of the body and atrophy and things like that. So those are the energetics of it. The organ systems that mugwort goes to specifically are the spiritual. It has a lot of uses within magic, a lot, burning the incense, making potions out of it, just sitting with the herb and meditating. One of the things I like to do with herbs, especially fresh ones, is just take a small amount of it, maybe just a flower of it, put it in your hands and kind of close your eyes and breathe in and out, like smell it, taste it, and kind of meditate on the herb. What you'll notice is like you'll start getting different sensations that you're normally not aware of. Like you might feel something in a certain part of your body. You might feel like a warmth in your chest, or you might see like an image or a picture in your mind that doesn't make any sense. It might remind you of some weird memory. That's in essence how one can really connect with the spirits of the plants. If that's something that you believe in, I believe that you can communicate with plants in some kind of way. I don't know exactly how it's the case, but I've had really interesting experiences with meditating with plants and getting images, and then taking those images and finding out later that that was what they're used for. Or I would, take an herb and I would feel something in a certain part of my body and I would look up the use and it's like, that's exactly what it's used for. Like, for example, I used hawthorn one time. I didn't actually know it was hawthorn. So this is especially fun if you take some herb, like some herbs you don't know, maybe even make some tinctures and mix them all up and then try to like taste it and meditate and try to figure out what herb it is or what it's useful for medicinally, just by sitting, meditating, feeling what happens to your body. This is where the system of hot, cold, dry, and damp comes in, right? This is where this language is useful. And that's where the organ thing comes in useful. So like, let's say you take an herb I took hawthorn one time. I didn't know it was hawthorn. And I felt like this kind of like pressure and warmth in my chest, like in my heart region. And it was kind of like, it felt kind of like, it wasn't like, very, very hot. It was kind of like a little warm, kind of like warm and fuzzy. So hawthorn itself is pretty warming, and it's an organ specific for the heart. So it shows you that you can know what the herb does without reading about it. I mean, that's how all herb effects were ever found out. So your own experience is important in this, and the language can help you understand the herb. So when you feel that warmth, you probably know it's probably a warming or hot type of herb. And when you feel, that like that in your chest area or your heart area, it's probably heart specific. So you already have a lot of information about this herb that's unknown to you. So very, very useful stuff. So this specifically, mugwort's very good for the kind of type of person who's, very artistic, they're intuitive, but they really want some grounding in, the real world. Sometimes like they have a very, very expanded and intense imaginations that sometimes get them into trouble with, paying the bills type of thing, like just the day-to-day worldly things. So mugwort's really good for that kind of person to help them kind of ground spiritually. Very good for insomnia, poor sleep, and especially when somebody has vivid dreams that interrupt their sleep. So this is again like almost an overactive imagination during the night when one is trying to get rest. Really good for people who have nerve exhaustion. They're very sensitive in general to many things, especially light. And they might just like, they're very irritable and very sensitive in nervous system. Like everything kind of bothers them, or they get anxious really easily. I've seen some people using it for seizures for children, which is really interesting. Also for nerve injuries. It also has some benefit for when people have been kind of overusing recreational substances like marijuana or opioids or anything that, the body becomes dependent on after some period of time. It's really useful for recovery after that. So maybe somebody who is trying to stop using cannabis for some period of time, but they feel kind of, their mood kind of gets a little bit messed up because they stop so suddenly. Mugwort's good for that. It also has a lot of uses for female hormonal and reproductive health. Its original name was actually motherwort, mother literally referring to the uterus. That's the ancient word for it. So earlier on, it was used a lot for women and issues with menses, PMS, really painful cramps, things of that nature. So as you see, the energetics, what it's used for, and the organ systems is specific for. So it's spiritually specific, kind of, it's one of these like shamanic or magical type herbs, along with angelica root is another example. So angelica root is actually burned as an incense. And I've taken pretty high doses of the tincture, and it definitely brings an almost mild psychedelic effect. I haven't done very high dose of mugwort, but I would suspect that it's also similar because pretty much every really magical herb has some kind of psychoactive effects. That's why it's magical, because it does something to your mind and spirit, right? Of course, Salvia divinorum is an example of that. It was used for divining cannabis throughout history. Psilocybin, et cetera, et cetera. They can all be considered spiritual specifics because they do something that's beyond just your mind. Like they do something that is hard to explain in terms of meaning of life and things of that nature. Yeah, so the way you would use this kind of explanation of the herb is somebody, let's say, somebody, or you are a person that's kind of, very intuitive, tends to be more artistic type, but you're having really crappy sleep. And maybe you have some like nerve pains or something like that. And you feel cold all the time and your skin is dry. And maybe your digestion's not too good. Then like this would be a great herb. So that's the way you would kind of narrow it down for use. So it's called the oldest of the plants. Yoldest Huerta in the Charm of the Nine Warts, an ancient Anglo-Saxon leech book. So leech books were basically these medical texts. Looked it up. I was like, what's a leech book? I think it has to do with the fact that leeches were used in medicine a lot for bloodletting. So there's this association of leeches and medicine and doctors. As I was saying, is associated with Artemis, goddess of the moon, mother of nature. And it's astrologically tied to the moon and used a lot in dream work. So somebody was asking about dream herbs. Mugwort is a great example of a dream herb that's helpful for dream time experience. I'll be talking about another herb that's very useful for that a little bit later on. I also, if you're interested in dreams, dream interpretation, dream and divination, you want to understand what your dreams mean, I teach a dream psychology class at PCC. It actually starts next Friday at 6 p.m., same time as this. And it meets, I believe, for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And I've taught this class before, and we go deep into Carl Jung's method of dream interpretation. We go through dream interpretation, talk about shamanism, lucid dreaming, astral projection, how to understand the symbolism in dreams, archetypes. It's a really fun class. So if you like dream stuff, definitely check it out. That's my plug for myself in here.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, would this work with? Because I have trouble dreaming. I probably dream like once a month and can even remember. And I always thought maybe because I smoked too much cannabis before bedtime. So, do you have any suggestion on that? Would this mugwort would work for me?
So your goal is to have more lucid dreams and remember your dreams and increase the frequency of them.
Yeah.
Mugwort probably wouldn't be the one to use because it actually is used for people who have too much vivid dreaming.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
I would be interested, though. Some herbs have interesting properties where you can take the herb and like sleep next to it, like next to your pillow.
Really?
I've had weird experiences of that. And I've heard people tell me they've had all sorts of weird experiences with that. Even people who are like, no, that woo-woo BS, like those same people have weird experiences too. So there's probably something to it. Yeah. Woo-woo is good. You got to have woo-woo too.
Oh, yeah.
Part of life. But yeah, if you want to
Isn't lavender one of those that you sleep next to?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I do have lavender. Oh, cool.
Yeah, they make lavender pillows. Lavender is cool too because it's really calming. Just the aroma in and of itself has a therapeutic benefit, hence the essential oil diffusing. So that one actually will probably be affecting you, like not just spiritually, but like, physiologically as well.
Okay.
As far as increasing dreams, there's a bunch of other herbs that you would want to go to first. One of the herbs we're going to talk about is called Calendula zakatachichi. It's fun to say, so it works well. It's probably the most disgusting herb I've ever tasted in my life, but no. It definitely is one of the most well known for inducing very vivid dreaming. So that's a good one to try for sure.
Okay, cool.
It's very, very bitter. It's so bitter. I tried to make a really strong tea out of it.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't even drink it. And I'm an herbalist. So like, that's like, it's like, yeah, you won't be able to really drink it. But what it's typically used for, I'll get into more of the specifics of Calendula zakatachichi.
Uh-huh.
It's actually called dream herb. What it's typically used as is a smoke. Like you'll smoke it out of a pipe or make a joint out of it. That's how it's usually used because it's really bitter. But if you smoke it, it's fine.
I think I had got some of those from the Dragon.
Dragon or Baron?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. They have they roll their own things. I remember there's like a bunch of other really good dream herbs in there. Like mugwort. Mugwort's another good smokable, by the way. Mugwort,
okay.
mullein. Those are all good. Like if you wanted to do like Calendula and mugwort, maybe something else, you definitely notice an effect. They're cool.
Thank you for the information.
Also, tobacco is a really good dream herb, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, it is. So it's good to maybe mix in a little bit into like another type of smoke. It also burns very well. That's why it's been used like forever in that form.
Okay. Cool.
So this is you guys can read into this for who was asking me about mugwort. There's a lot of information about it. I didn't want to go through all of it since it's a lot, but this one's really interesting. It talks about the history of it, what it's been used for, and very specific things. Now we have calendula. It's the thing I made the tincture out of. Notice the beautiful orange colors. So this one's pretty sweet. So sweet means that it's nutritive. It builds up a system. It's very bitter as well. So it has some kind of digestive stimulation. Generally, bitters have digestive stimulation. There's an interesting theory of why this is the case. So we have bitter receptors on our tongue, and they're directly interface, and they're closely connected to the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is one of the main nerves of the whole body. And it controls, digestion, controls like breathing. It's one of the nerves that just affects the whole body, one of the biggest ones. And the idea is that the bitter receptors, when they're activated, just that bitter taste, it activates the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is really important in digestion. So the idea is just the bitter taste of itself. It's not even, this is kind of interesting here, because this is kind of going into a new place with how herbs can work. So bitter herbs, it's not even necessarily the compound that's doing it. It's not like, the compound goes into your blood and it affects your stomach. Just the taste of bitter is what does it. So there's this aspect of taste and energetics being closely related. So the taste tells you about the energetics, and the energetics are very related to the taste. So this one, calendula, is used a lot for cold and damp relaxation. If you guys remember earlier on, was saying that colds are the classic cold and damp relaxation state. The cold part is, they feel colds. Typically there's like lower fevers with colds than there is with other kinds of diseases. So it's not really that hot of a condition, even for infections. And, the person feels sluggish, they feel tired, they look pale. That's the cold condition. The damp relaxation part is, once again, the fluids are just coming out everywhere. Snotty nose, they get discharges, sneezing, watery eyes, etc. So that's why calendula is really good for the immune system. So specific for the immune system, digestive system, liver, and the skin. It has a long history of use for putting on all sorts of different cuts, burns, stings, frostbite, acne, bruises, blisters, anything that's going on with the skin in general. Used externally. You could use it as an oil or as a poultice. So a poultice is like, you take a bunch of the herb, you put a little bit of water on it, and you just put it right there. Maybe cover it with something like a bandage or something. One of the specifics of calendula, so somebody has a cold and they have this and that, snotty nose, but their lymph nodes are really swollen after they get sick. And maybe they have some colored mucus, like their snot is like a funky color. That calendula is really good for that. It's one of the best like lymphatics. These are herbs that are really good at moving the lymph through the system. The lymph nodes are basically the cleanup crew of the immune system. They're where a lot of the immune cells deposit all the nasty funkiness out of your body to clear it out. That's where some of the major battles of the immune system happen. So sometimes, lymph nodes get really swollen and they chronically get swollen, and then the person has weakened immune system because of that. So calendula is really good for somebody like who has like really swollen glands. So mono would be an amazing example for something this would be useful for. I didn't see in the herb book that it was useful for mono, but I'll bet money that it's one of the best things for mono, just because mono has, profuse discharges. I don't know if you've ever had it. It's terrible. Funky color, really swollen glands, and the person is like really weak. So that fits like perfectly for that symptom picture. So that's just an example of like, if you know what the energetics and everything are, you can think of new uses that maybe no one's found out, and they could be really effective. And then when you become a professional herbalist, you could you could mention my name and get your name in some herbalist book for like, this is useful for this disease that no one knew about. So that's kind of cool. Also good for ulcers of the mouth and stomach, upset stomach, and liver issues. Cool thing, another aspect. So this, I didn't talk about this at all. There's this idea of the doctrine of signatures. Doctrine of signatures is this idea that something based on how the herbs look is how they work. So like if an herb looks like, so a walnut looks like a brain, good for the brain. Tomato looks like a heart, good for the heart. It's colored the same as the heart, good for the heart. It's this idea that there's like these signatures in nature that tell you what the herb is good for. The reason I bring that up is because calendula is this kind of like beautiful yellow orangish. Generally plants that are yellow, that have yellow flowers, or they have yellow like sap or anything like that, are really good for the liver. It's similar color to the bile and the liver and things like that. So you can actually tell a lot by herb just from the color of it in addition. So you use the fresh dried flowers, oil salve, tincture, poultice. Bilberry. Who was asking about the bilberry? They may have.
That was me.
Oh, that was you? Okay, awesome.
Yes.
So bilberry it's in the same family as blueberries are. So it's pretty similar in use. So the taste is sweet and sour. The sour thing, as I was mentioning before, the sour taste is associated with cooling. So if you taste something and it's sour, it's probably a cooling herb. What's a cooling herb? Cooling herbs are good anti-inflammatories. Just a general rule of thumb. It's also pretty drying. Actually, mildly drying. It's not that drying. It's more on the cooling side. So being that it's cooling, it's good for hot conditions. Being that it's drying, it's good for damp stagnation, relaxation. We'll see this play out in the specifics now. So what organ systems is specific for? Very specific for the eyes. This is an interesting one. I'm going to tell you guys a fun fact in a moment of what it was used for. So it's specific for the eyes, really good for the kidneys and bladder and the digestive system. So those are the main organs that it works with. So it's used for people who have eye fatigue, like tired eyes from, staring at screens all day long. Poor vision, glaucoma, cataracts, most conditions of the eye, things like diabetic retinopathy. That's where somebody's, the nerves in their eye gets damaged from high blood sugar, from diabetes. So they start losing their vision, or vision loss from older age, things like that. It's good for that. Good for mouth ulcers, sore throat, diarrhea. Also, it's used a lot for urinary tract infections and edema. So parsing this out. So we know that it's drying. So drying herbs in general, the way that they dry is they make you release more fluids. So things like edema, where there's a buildup of fluids, it's dry, so it helps with that. Also helps with UTIs, because obviously it's a diuretic, so it makes you urinate more, which helps you clear the UTI faster. Diarrhea is another example of a very wet, damp condition. There's a lot of fluids leaving. That's like the biggest danger of diarrhea. Actually, most diseases that cause diarrhea and death are just from dehydration. So water loss is a really big, important thing in those kind of conditions. So bilberry is drying, so it kind of has some astringency, especially the leaves. The leaves have a really powerful astringent effect. That's really good for the UTIs, and also for just general like swelling in the body. Berries are very high in vitamin C, flavonoids, and they're very cooling, as I was saying. You can also make them into a syrup. You juice them. So you squeeze them into a juice, and then you add whatever sweetener you want, like sugar, and cook it as you make any other syrup. And that's really good for menstrual regularity. So bilberry is very related to the blueberry, as I was talking about. Blueberry isn't typically that used for herbalism, whereas bilberry is, even though they're very similar in effects. So you can more or less use them somewhat interchangeably. So there's this interesting story I was reading that bilberry was used during World War II by British pilots who were, flying around at night to increase their night vision capacities which is really interesting. It's like one of those weird specific things of herbs. So bilberry can actually help you with night vision, like if you have trouble seeing at night. Also, it was used during the Battle of Britain, which is a fun historical fact.
That is awesome. Thank you.
Right? I want to try that out. I want to see like if it really helps with the night vision. I'm fascinated by that. That's so specific that it has to be true. Like people don't make up things like that.
Well, and the vision is one of the reasons I wanted to do that tincture. And I drive for Lyft when we're not in this whole situation. So
you definitely send me an email. Send me an email and tell me if it really works. I need experiment.
I will do that.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Ginger, or also known as zingiber in Latin. This one, as you can guess, very hot in terms of its effects. And it's pretty drying in general too. Most hot herbs are pretty drying. Pretty obviously, if you increase the heat of the body, you're going to kind of work up a sweat. So it's obviously drying. Used for cold. It's so somebody was asking me about anti-inflammatory herbs. Ginger is a really good anti-inflammatory herb. It works in a similar way that that NSAIDs work, like ibuprofen, the anti-inflammatories. Has a lot of cool research coming out of Iran. Believe it or not, Iran has like an amazing herbalism community because they're always releasing some new research about like the effects of herbs. So you see a lot of like research study coming out of there. But I remember reading one that was talking about how it's really good for menstrual cramps, the pain of menstrual cramps. Also really good for pain in general. Most people don't know that about ginger. Really good for like tense muscles, muscle pains. It's a circulatory stimulant, really gets your heart pumping, really stimulating. It's that hot herb, that stimulating effect. Obviously amazing for immune system. I love making, strong ginger teas and just chewing ginger when I'm not feeling well. Great for digestion. Probably the most specific thing, ginger. When I think of ginger, I think about nausea and I think about indigestion. And that's the one herb that pretty much always does the job. You can use it fresh to chew it, like if you're feeling nauseous for whatever reason. Pretty amazing in its effects. Or, after dinner to kind of get your digestive system going so you have less indigestion. Obviously, it's added to a lot of foods, so it's good in that form as well. The dried generally is stronger. So if you're going to make a tincture, probably make it from the dried ginger, but you can make one from the fresh too. So it's specific for coldness throughout the body, for circulation, for muscle cramps, and for chronic inflammation. Really good anti-inflammatory. This is one of those weird ones where it's a hot herb, but it's good anti-inflammatory. So it's probably some of the other properties that are in it, or maybe it's having some kind of homeopathic effect where it's so hot that it has almost the opposite effect because of its strength. Really good for sweating out colds too. Makes you very sweaty if you eat a lot of it. Ginger and garlic all day. Dill. Anathum graveolens. This one is very aromatic, why it's used in cooking, warming, used for cold, specific for the digestive system. You'll see a lot of these cooking herbs are specific for the digestive system. Somebody at some point figured out that they're good for that, and they kind of just started adding it to all their food. So there's this whole aspect of herbalism where you kind of just eat herbs as part of your diet. Like just mix it through, like throw some garlic, some ginger, some dill, whatever spices you like. If it's a spice you like, chances are it has a lot of medicinal power, especially in higher doses. Some of them you don't notice in the lower doses, like, you put a little rosemary in there, you're not going to feel it. But if you make a tincture from rosemary, you'll notice its effects. It's very calming, and kind of makes your mind pretty lucid, like mental clarity. Dill is specific for indigestion, gas, used a lot for children because it's very mild in its effects, very safe to eat in high amounts. Another similar herb to dill is fennel, another great digestive stimulant. Throwing some fennel in your food and some dill, that'll make for some nice digestion, and you'll you'll feel good and probably have less indigestion and gas and bloating if that's something that you deal with. Also stimulates milk production. Fun fact. As does corn. I actually feed cows corn to stimulate their milk production. It's not just because they're cheap. It's also because it stimulates milk production. GMO corn, of course. I was reading that it helps protect infants from the curses of a witch. So if you know some witch and she doesn't like you, then protect your infants with dill. Dream herbs. This class of herbs is called oneirogens, and they help with dreaming. They can enhance the dream state, or they can kind of create it for people who don't remember their dreams or they're not that lucid for them. Some of them have almost no effect while you're awake, but they have a lot of effect while you're sleeping. So some of them you might take it and you won't notice anything, but you'll have the most vivid, weird dreams that night. So they're working on something that's very specific to dreams. There's a bunch of them that are very good for this. We're going to be talking about Clea Zacatecici. Also, Selene undulata is another one you can try. Salvia divinorum in smaller doses. In large doses, it's a wild psychedelic, like different dimension causing type of psychedelic. That's typically smoked. And even tobacco. Here's Calea. It's also known as Calea ternifolia. It has two names. It's been used by the Chontal Indians of Mexico to contact the divine through dreams. So it's used in dream divination, meaning bringing answers to life's problems or some kind of guidance through dreams. There's a long tradition in Greece of this practice called dream incubation at the Asclepian temples. Asclepius was the god of medicine and healing in Greek mythology. In these temples, people would come there with some kind of illness, and they would go there to have their dreams divined by kind of a healer priest. So they would go to sleep. They did all sorts of different activities, like meditative activities. They had certain diets, and they used certain herbs that no one knows which ones they used. Maybe this was one of them. Who knows? Probably some psychedelic herbs too. And the person would go to sleep, praying for some kind of answer to their problem, their illness, whatever. And then their dream would be interpreted to find the healing that they need. So they were seeking an answer through their dreams of what they need to do for their life, for their health, etc. So this is an old tradition.
Is this one you said was really bitter?
Yes.
Okay.
I highly recommend not making a tea.
Okay.
Definitely go for the smoking form. Unless you don't care. It's really bitter though. So it's probably good for digestion, although it's not typically used for that. So some research shows that it increases dream recall and increases hypnagogic imagery. You probably have experienced this. It's like when you're kind of falling asleep and you see kind of images, but you're not really dreaming, you're not really asleep yet. You see some kind of images in the in-between state. So it's good at increasing that. And it produces brain waves that are similar to those while dreaming. So for a person who's awake, which is kind of interesting. Also, it's used for cats. I got to try this on my cat sometime. It's supposed to induce some sleep in cats. So I'll have to try it out and see if it helps my cat survive the plane trip. We've got rosemary. This one is warm and dry. Of course, it's for cold and damp relaxation then. Really specific for the nervous system, respiratory system, digestive, and cardiovascular. It's specific for people with poor circulation. So it's got that warming effect that kind of moves the blood, opens up the body. They have cool skin. It's that warming effect again. Weak digestion, once again, stimulating the digestion. One of the strong specific uses of it is for memory loss. Has a very long history of being used as a memory agent. Actually, one of my tinctures that I'm making right now, that's nootropic blend, meaning it's really good for increasing memory, increasing cognition, those kind of things. Rosemary is one of the main ingredients in it. So it's very, very good. Used a lot. People who need to study things, learn a lot. Students, it's great for them to get a tincture, or even the essential oil is really strong. Could even put like the essential oil on your wrist or something, and just kind of just the scent of it helps with memory. Good for anxiety, palpitations, that kind of thing. Also, it's interesting. It's used for a lot of like lung stuff, like people with asthma, bronchitis, that kind of thing. So it also has a lot of the very aromatic herbs we'll see, like thyme and oregano and these very like fragrant herbs. They tend to be pretty good for the lungs and breathing. So one thing you can do that's kind of cool, if you don't want to buy essential oils, there's this method where it's a little bit labor intensive, but it's pretty effective. You take like a pot of water and you boil it. And you throw a bunch of rosemary or eucalyptus or thyme, oregano, whatever you want. And you put it on like a low boil so that there's like a little bit of steam rising from it. And then you drape a towel over your head and your head over the pot, and you inhale the essential oils and the fumes. Really, really good for like clearing a stuffed nose or like lung infections and things like that. If you can't get your hands on some essential oil, you can do the same thing with essential oil. Get a diffuser. Rosemary essential oil is really good for that. This is one of those herbs I was talking about that's really high in essential oils. So you're going to want to use higher percentage alcohol. If you want to make a tincture of this, get some Everclear and make it, 3 parts alcohol, 1 part water. It's specific for heart, really good for circulation, for heart things. Also good for high cholesterol, low blood pressure, and randomly it's good for bad breath. I don't know if that's because of the scent of it or because it has some other property, but somebody figured that out. So thanks to them. Interesting use of it. There's a tradition of using rosemary to make wine. So you actually will take a bunch of rosemary chopped up and just throw it in your favorite red wine and leave it for like a couple of weeks. And then, you strain it out, strain the wine back out into the bottle. And then you have this rosemary infused wine, which is it's just basically like a tincture because it's alcohol. But it's really delicious, really good for memory, and it'll have a lot more effects than just wine would have. And maybe you won't forget as much when you drink. I don't know. That's just a guess because it's very good for memory. You can also throw it into your bath. Red clover. This is a beautiful plant. I actually have some. I'll show you guys real quick. It's very, very pretty blossoms. Sorry, yeah. And it smells really good. It makes for an amazing tea. It has a very good flavor.
Is that the same clover that like grows in the grass that you can eat and it's sweet if you pick the little pieces off the petals?
Do you mean like the 4-leaf clover?
Well, there's like little purple flowers that when we were kids that would just grow in the grass.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's red clover.
Yeah, and then you'd pull the petal and it was sweet when you got close to the center.
Exactly, yeah.
Neat. That's cool.
Yeah, it grows all over the place here in the Pacific Northwest. You'll probably see it all around. Very pretty. Sweet, as you were saying. Cool and damp energetics. So meaning it's really good for hot conditions and for dry conditions. So let's say, somebody had a dry cough. Red clover is perfect because it's both dry and it's like a kind of cool condition. It's specific for the glands. So this is another one that's specific for lymph nodes, but also the other glands of the body, like the parotid glands, that make saliva and things like that can get swollen. Eye glands, like the tear glands and things like that. So people with like dry mouth, dry eyes, they can benefit from red clover. Also good for cold sores. It's specific really for swollen neck, lymph nodes, swollen breast glands, hard lumps in breast. It has this particular affinity towards the breast, just because of its phytoestrogenic effect. So there's several herbs that are called phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are plants that have similar effects to natural estrogen. Red clover is one of them. So if you're looking for a plant that's kind of estrogenic for whatever reason, red clover is a really good option for that. It's pretty mild too in terms of its effects. Also used externally in all sorts of skin growths. There's a lot of people use it for cancer, like skin cancers and stuff. I don't know personally. I've never used it for that, but who knows? So you can use the flowers fresh, or you can make a fragrant tea with the dried flowers. It makes a really yummy tea. All right, and we just got a few more herbs. So we got St. John's wort, one of my favorites. Some of you guys will find this interesting because this is one of those magical herbs. So it was used in medieval times to cast away bad spirits, kind of for exorcisms and for protecting people from bad spirits. What we now would probably refer to as, anxiety, depression, panic, mental disorders, and things like that. So that's why St. John's wort is used for that. It's probably both, because I don't think that there's such a, separation between the mind and spirit. So it could both be protecting you from bad spirits and also helping your mind at the same time. That's how I view it, at least. One of the most well-researched herbs for use as an SSRI, so for depression. One has to be pretty careful with this. It can be dangerous when you mix it with other pharmaceuticals. This is one of those herbs that you don't really want to mix with too many pharmaceuticals, because it affects the same detox system of the liver that gets rid of these pharmaceuticals. So it can make them reach really high concentrations, which can be dangerous. This is a herb. This is probably one of my favorite herbs of all time. And I haven't had really any negative effects from it, but it's in the literature, it's widely talked about having some potential negative side effects. So definitely use it carefully. Make sure you talk to a doctor, herbalist, somebody to see if what you're taking is not going to interact with it. This is one of those that has a lot of interactions. But I don't want to dissuade you from St. John's wort because it's an awesome plant. So it's associated with the sun. It's got an amazing, cheerful, happy, solar type of energy. Very happy, very uplifting. This is why the reason it's used for depression, because that's a dark place. Some people describe depression as clouds just hanging over their lives. So St. John's wort is it's like that, light, brings that light back into your life. And it's specifically very good for people who feel depressed because they feel isolated. So St. John's wort is the ultimate pandemic herb, I would say. Also, it's really good for viruses, by the way. So that's a double whammy. So this is one of those herbs that's really good in an oil. So you can make this into a beautiful red oil and then make it into cream. It's very specific for the nervous system in general. One of the really cool uses of St. John's wort, especially if you make a cream or a salve out of it, really good for nerve injury or nerve pain, anything like that, where there's nerve pain. There's this woman who was telling me she had trigeminal neuralgia, where she would have this sharp pain that was 10 out of 10. She could hardly live with it. St. John's wort's really good for that kind of thing. When you think of St. John's wort in terms of the energetics of it, think of it as warming. It's very stimulating, good for depression, and it's specific for the nervous system. So the mind, mental health, any kind of nerve pain, nerve injury, helps with regrowth, things like that. Also really good for viruses, for viral outbreaks. It's used for herpes and things like that topically. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of a do-it-all plant. It does a lot of things. Some really good research on it. I think this one study I was looking at, I don't know if it's in here. No, it's not in here. A study I was looking at that said that it was just as effective as SSRIs. So it's just as effective as prescription pharmaceuticals for depression, for like moderate to mild depression. So strong one. One of my favorite tinctures that I make, I use fresh St. John's wort to make it. It's around about June. So it's probably out now. Maybe you can still find it growing somewhere. It's probably mostly wilted by now, but around June, St. John's Day is actually like June 20 something. It's around that time. And it grows all around here. The way you can, if you see something that looks like St. John's wort, yellow flowers, there's two ways you can know it's St. John's wort. This is one of my most favorite plants to identify because it's so easy and it kind of shows you the cool aspect of finding herbs in the wild and recognizing them. Also, there's a lot of plants that also have yellow flowers. So like it could be pretty confusing actually. But this one, you'll know it's St. John's wort for two reasons. So it's called Hypericum perforatum. Hyperion was the god of the sun in ancient mythology. It's got the solar energy. Perforatum, perforated. It has in the leaves perforations, meaning it has little holes. So if you actually hold like a leaf of it up to the sun, you'll see little holes in it. It's a very peculiar plant, and its leaves are little holes. So it looks like there's little, pinholes, like little stars in it or something. So if it has those holes, it's like 99% St. John's wort. I don't know of any other plant that has that. Two, if you want to be extra sure for that 1%, if you take the buds of it, like the flower buds, and squeeze them and rub them between your fingers, you'll see this like purple reddish stuff come out of it, which is really weird because this plant is yellow. So it's kind of out of the ordinary that you squish a yellow flower and it turns purple. So that's the hypericin in it, one of the most powerful medicinal components of it. It's actually used standalone for depression, things like that. That compound has a lot of color, like this purplish color when you squeeze it. When you make a tincture, it's like the most beautiful color of crimson. It looks, like blood almost, actually pretty similar in hue to blood. So I would suspect that it's really good for building the blood. I haven't heard of that use, but just because it looks like that, I would say that maybe it's worth trying. That's one of my favorites, as I said.
So would the cream be effective for nerve regrowth?
Yeah, specifically, yeah, that would be even better. Nerve regrowth, nerve pain, that kind of thing. The cream is even better for that. Also really good for like wounds. It's another one of those like calendula I was talking about. They're like these classic wound herbs. Before they had antibiotics, they would use these kind of things. Some other stuff, it's associated with the solar plexus. It's got that yellow energy, digestive organs, and nervous system. It's cool that this plant is very specific also to what's called the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is the nervous system of your gut. So it helps specifically with that. So anyone who has like a lot of nervous type of issues, but also has digestive problems because of it, St. John's wort is another that's really good for that. It's celebrated, here it is, St. John's Day, June 24th. It's got hypericin, as I was saying. So specifically, hypericin is an uptake inhibitor of serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, GABA, and L-glutamate. So those are different neurotransmitters that are crucial for mood stability. Also increases melatonin levels. Some people believe that it changes how serotonin is produced. So it increases the light utilization. Very fascinating because not only is this herb related to the sun, strangely enough. So someone figured out that it's related to the sun a while ago. But what's even more fascinating is that it makes you sensitive to light. So this is one of those weird things about this herb is if you take a lot of St. John's wort, you don't want to expose yourself to like really strong sunlight for too long because it makes you like burn easier. It's weird. Also makes you more sensitive to light. If you take St. John's wort, like the sun might be like a little bit too bright. Maybe it's too much solar energy. Who knows? This is the historical usage. Wound medicine. So Paracelsus, he was an alchemical physician of the 1500s. He said that St. John's wort is almost a universal medicine, driving away phantasmata in the sphere of man that produces spectra, which induce epilepsy, madness, insanity, and suicidal ideation. So phantasmata are like these spirits. Father Sebastian Kneipp, the founder of naturopathy in a lot of ways, called it the perfume of God and the flower of fairies. And here's some other stuff that it could be used for. So it talks a little bit about the oil. You can actually use the oil internally as well. Chamomile, classic. There's a lot of different species, but the two main ones are German chamomile and Roman chamomile. They're pretty different. Their effects are pretty similar, but their taste and their fragrance is significantly different. The essential oil of chamomile is this beautiful blue compound called azulene. If you ever make an oil out of chamomile, your mind will be blown. I highly recommend it. If done properly and with proper potency, that oil should be blue. So there's a weird color to come out of it. Chamomile is really good for pain relief. Someone was asking me about things that are good for pain, muscular pain. In addition to ginger, also chamomile is really good for that. Really good for the muscular pains that come about from fever. Amazing digestive. It has this specific personality trait. I remember learning this in multiple herb classes. This is a commonly told story. So it's really good for people who are like, maybe if you're feeling like that or somebody else is, like very whiny, like a baby, very irritable. You pick them up and they want to be put down. You put them down, they want to be picked up. They're indecisive, but they're also irritable. And, you know, chamomile is like a specific herb for that kind of thing. So it's used a lot for children, for who are teething, who have stomach pains, digestive problems, toothaches, etc. Because, you know, babies act like babies, but sometimes adults act like babies. So chamomile is good for those kind of adults when they're feeling like that. Makes a great tea. I'm sure you guys have had it. It's one of the most popular teas of all time. So this goes in a little bit more in depth about what it's useful for. Like you're in an irritable funk, irritable, angry. It's in the nervine class. People who need chamomile are like, they're quarrelsome and they're trying to pick a fight with everybody because they're not feeling well or they're in pain. So these are the preparation methods. You can make a tincture, of course. You can make a bath out of it. So you throw some chamomile in a closed cloth bag, put it in really hot water and just lay in it. Really good, very relaxing for muscle tension, muscle pains, that kind of thing. You can use the essential oil as a diffuser. Some interesting studies with it. One study on people with generalized anxiety disorder showed that it has antidepressant effects and also anxiety relieving effects. So it's really good for anxiety in pretty high doses. So that's 1,500 milligrams of chamomile extract. So that's a pretty high dose. You want to make a really strong tea out of it if you're using it for that. Really good for insomnia. Also has some potential benefit for menopause, cortisol balance, blood sugar balance. This is another one of those do-it-all type of herbs. If you do want to use something naturally for fevers, chamomile is a really good one. It's one of the classic uses of it. It's called a febrifuge. Those are herbs that lower fever. Then I think this is the last one, lavender. One of my favorites, has almost 30 species. So many, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. If you ever go to one of those farmers markets, you may have seen all the different types that they sell. They sell pillows and soaps and everything you could possibly want. Lavender. Sometimes they overdo it. Lavender chocolate's pretty good too, if you've ever had it. So it comes in all sorts of different forms. They make creams, caplets, aromatherapy, massage oils, and bath salts. The good news, what I'll tell you is you can save a crap ton of money on essential oils and just make really, really strong tinctures. Like if the essential oil is something that you want to use internally, you know, they have these kind of caplets that have essential oil and people take them internally for like anxiety, stress, that kind of thing. If you make a really, really strong tincture with like 75% alcohol, you'll have a lot of the essential oils there and you'll save a ton of money too. So it's used, this is another one that's used for wounds, also used for muscle spasms, indigestion. Its overall main use is for people who have a tension in their nervous system, and it supports the calm mood. It's one of those classic nervines with that cooling effect, but it also has a warming effect. It's one of the weird ones that has a warming and a cooling effect. really useful for overactive minds, anxiety, depression, exhaustion. If you're familiar with Rudolf Steiner, he was a 20th century mystic. He said that lavender is specific for negative states of the soul, where the astral body grasps the physical body too tightly, resulting in tense muscles and nervous system degeneration. So it has benefit in calming mind that is constantly thinking, so much to sleep is difficult, along with passion flower. So passion flower and lavender are both really good for you're up at night, you can't fall asleep because you're just ruminating and you can't stop thinking. So lavender, really strong lavender tea with passion flower will do the job. Here's some research. A study of 200 people with anxiety disorders and insomnia said that it was as effective as pharmaceuticals for these conditions. There's a formulation of it called lavandula that is like little caplets of essential oil that has some research being used for depression too. So this is another good nervous system herb, as a lot of the fragrant mints are. All right, that is the class. Here are the resources that I use: the herbal medicine, the Matthew Wood books, and you can look into those. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the class. I hope you found something useful from it. I'm going to send you the link, and I'm going to send you the course notes. And I thank you guys so much for being part of this.
Thank you for teaching the class.